Proctor, Tondela Hall, Sakia Gunn, Bree Black, Rakia Boyd, Naila Franklin, India Martin, Atatiana Jefferson, Corinne Gaines, Brianna Taylor. In our homes, we are supposed to be safe. Shed layers of the day, no need to code switch at home. Supposed to be able to make dinner, kikiing on the phone with our mother, study for school after a long day's work, be with our mates, go to bed and sleep good all day long. In our homes, we're supposed to be safe. Breastfeed babies without a veil or shame. Teach them about our her stories and his stories and our they, them stories. Supposed to be able to pick out our natural hair, twist our locks, unwrap our crown, listen to Coltrane, Meg the Stallion, and Tasha Cobbs Leonard. In our homes, we're supposed to be safe. Supposed to be able to wear those fluffy bunny ear slippers and watch Beth and Randall Pearson on This Is Us. And at the end of the day, sip on a bedtime comfort tea of soursop or golden milk. Exhale the day, letting tomorrow take care of itself. Go to bed and sleep all night long. In our homes, we're supposed to be safe. Awakened by the sun, inhale the new day. Hydrate, moisturize, meditate, and pray. In the home of our bodies, we're also supposed to be safe. The right to choose. Not merely put here to birth babies, but to birth ideas, innovation, creation, birth freedom. In the home of our bodies, we're supposed to be safe to be who we are, cisgender, genderqueer, transgender, born as is, to be homosexual, heterosexual, pansexual, asexual, born as is, safe in our fatness or our thinness or our lightness or our darkness, safe in our ability or disability, safe in our mental and emotional health, and safe even if we are not in balance and struggling with being more than a diagnosis. Safe in our loving, safe in our profession, safe in our creating, safe in our living, safe in our breathing, safe in the home of our body, safe in the home of our living. Shots fired through window, through door, through the dark, through the light, shots fired through the flesh of Black female bodies, shots fired through the humanity of Black women. The last 3 Black women killed by cops were in their homes: Corinne Gaines, Atatiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor. We speak your names. So now, they be flying African stardust and energy. They are safe and everywhere, safe in their cosmic, everlasting, ancestral home. So this evening, I invite us to be present in this virtual space, safe and courageous, safe to believe, trust, and listening to hear, listening to understand. Black feminist and womanist praxis. I also invite you to use your imagination and envision joy, Black feminist joy, both during the process of abolition and the joy that comes as a result of abolition. I invite you in this very moment to just shake off the day. I invite you to pause, to close your eyes. If you don't feel comfortable in closing them, then just lower your gaze, focusing on the tip of your nose. I invite you to inhale through your nose, breathing in. And we're breathing in emancipation, liberation, and freedom. Hold your breath and breathe out, making the ah sound. Breathing out, emancipation, liberation, and freedom. I invite you to keep this ebb and flow of breath during this virtual gathering. And at any time, if you feel uncomfortable, I invite you to just shift your little booty in the chair or big booty, whatever size booty you got, just shift it. Shift perspective, shift your body in your seat. Press your feet flat on the floor. And I invite you to take your fingertips and just tap them together. And that'll help calm you, regulate you, to keep you present in this space. I see you, I hear you, I believe you, you matter. Welcome.
It was Veronica Bohannon. Veronica Precious Bohannon is a certified art therapist, youth development practitioner, writer, and artist. It's been so long since we've been in community together, and it was so powerful to be able to listen to you and hear you and be a part of your community tonight. Veronica's work exists at the intersection of mental health counseling, expressive therapies, positive youth development, womanism, Black feminism, restorative practices, and pedagogy of the oppressed. At the intersection, she centers accountability, healing, and restoration. So thank you again, Veronica, for all that you've brought this evening and over the many years that I've been in community with you. And welcome everyone. I'm Ann Russo. I'm the director of the Women's Center and a professor in Women's and Gender Studies at DePaul University. I have such gratitude to have the opportunity to welcome you into this conversation on Black feminism and abolition with some amazing Black feminist abolitionists that I've had such the honor of knowing and working alongside of over these many years. Mariame Kaba, Rachel Caidor, Beth Richie, Deana Lewis. Each of them have been integral to the building of Black feminist abolition in Chicago and beyond. I want to thank our co-organizers from the Center for Black Diaspora, Dr. Julie Moody Freeman, who's the director, Joelle Daly, the assistant director, as well as Jennifer Ogumike and Jessica Williams, student workers in the center. And also I want to thank Haley Curtis, Nina Wilson, and Belinda Andrade from the Women's Center. And I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies, Critical Ethnic Studies, American Studies, and Community Service Studies, who've all contributed to making this event possible this evening. As Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore suggest, abolition is as much about what we are building in the present and into the future as it is about dismantling, as much about presence as it is about absence. And for me, the practice and building of abolition is what comes up when I think of the work of each of our speakers this evening. Over the past 20 years, each of our speakers, individually and collectively, has provided incredible leadership in the collective building of abolitionist thinking, practices, and visions. I, like thousands of others in Chicago and beyond, have had the great opportunity to collaborate, to connect, to participate in the many Black feminist informed gatherings, conferences and non-conferences on abolition, transformative justice, and community accountability, in the powerful archival exhibits, in the support and activist campaigns for incarcerated survivors, in the protests against police violence and public officials who've condoned it, and much more. I've learned so much from each of you, and I have so much gratitude to be in this conversation with you this evening. What I appreciate is the way that you hold the complexities of violence with the needs of support, healing, and accountability. Your determined focus on the intersections of interpersonal and state violence when many different movements focus on one or the other. Your refusal to participate in the violence of incarceration, punishment, and retribution. Your consistent invitations to imagine and practice a justice that heals, mends, and transforms rather than harms. And the ways you invite us all into an ethics of love and care for those most harmed by these intersecting systems. So I want to share a bit about each speaker in alphabetical order, beginning with Rachel Caidor. So Rachel is a member of Love and Protect, a Chicago-based collective that provides material, emotional, social, and political support for incarcerated people of color who have been criminalized for surviving and resisting domestic, sexual, trans, homophobic violence, or state violence. Amazing, beautiful organization. Rachel also works with the Just Practice Collaborative, building people's capacity to address sexual and interpersonal violence through community accountability processes. She's worked for years in Chicago's anti-violence field since 1997, working in many different roles, including the coordinator of the Chicago Area Rape Crisis Hotline, the assistant director of UIC's Campus Advocacy Network, and as the director of the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. She currently serves as the assistant director of UIC's Gender and Women's Studies program, and she'd like you all to know that she loves pizza a lot. Mariame Kaba. Mariame is an organizer, educator, and curator who's active in movements for racial, gender, and transformative justice. She's the founder and project of Project NIA, a grassroots organization with a vision to end youth incarceration. Mariame is currently a researcher at Interrupting Criminalization, Research and Action at the Barnard Center for Research on Women, a project she co-founded with Andrea Ritchie in 2018. Mariame has co-founded, I would say, a zillion projects and organizations over the years, and I'll name a few. We Charge Genocide, the Chicago Freedom School, the Chicago Task Force on Violence Against Girls and Young Women, Love and Protect, the Just Practice Collaborative, and Survived and Punished. She serves on the advisory boards of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, Critical Resistance, and the Chicago Community Bond Fund. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, The Nation Magazine, The Guardian, The Washington Post, In These Times, Teen Vogue, The New Inquiry, etc. Deana Lewis. Deana's scholarly and activist work focuses on trans and non-trans Black women and girls who've experienced state violence. Her research interests include Black girlhood studies, the school-prison nexus, and youth incarceration. She's especially interested in Black girls' experiences within the school-to-prison pipeline and how their experiences are often left out of discourses about youth incarceration. Deana is also a member of Love and Protect, as I said, the grassroots collective dedicated to supporting marginalized gender identities who are criminalized or harmed by state and interpersonal violence. She's also a founding member of the Just Practice Collaborative, whose purpose is to build community capacity to effectively and with empathy respond to intimate partner violence and sexual assault without relying primarily on police or other state-based systems. She also participates in the work of Survived and Punished, and the Chicago Community Bond Fund. Beth Ritchie. Beth Ritchie is head of the Department of Criminology, Law, and Justice and professor of Black Studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her scholarly and activist work has been on the ways that race, ethnicity, and social position affect women's experience of violence and incarceration, focusing on the experiences of African-American battered women and sexual assault survivors. She's the author of Arrested Justice, Black Women Violence in America's Prison Nation, which chronicles the contemporary anti-violence movement during the time of mass incarceration. She's one of the editors of The Long Term, Resisting Life Sentences, Working Towards Freedom, and author of Compelled to Crime, The Gender Entrapment of Black Battered Women. She's working on a new book titled Abolition, Feminism, Now. Yes, with Angela Davis, Gina Dent, and Erica Miners. She's been awarded the Audre Lorde Legacy Award from the Union Institute, the Advocacy Award from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, a Visionary Award from the Violence Intervention Project, and the UIC Woman of the Year Award. She's also the part of the, on the board of the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community, the National Network for Women in Prison, A Call to Men, and a founding member of Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. So please welcome our speakers. Before we, so we're gonna have some questions that we've developed together that the speakers will answer. And that will be our program. And then we'll close with Dr. Julie Moody Freeman from the Center for Black Diaspora. So we won't be opening it up for question and answer because it just isn't going to work for this evening. But before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to Mariame Kaba. So Mariame.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Anne. So I thought it would be nice. First, I want to thank Veronica for coming into the space and grounding us and centering us and putting us in the right frame of mind to begin. I just wanted to similarly offer an invitation for us to bring our Black feminist ancestors into the space with us today. So I'm going to just read very briefly a section of an essay written by June Jordan called Problems of Language in a Democratic State, published in 1982. She says, last week, a delegation of Black women graduate students invited me to address a large meeting that loud yellow flyers described as a Black Sisters Speak Out, followed by 2 exclamation points. I went to the gathering with great excitement. Obviously, we would deal with one or another crisis, whether national or international. I simply wondered which enormous and current quandary would be the one most of the women wanted to discuss. During the warm-up period, one of the women announced that we should realize our debt to Black women who have preceded us in history. We are here, she said, because of the struggle of women like, and here her sentence broke down. She tried again. We have come this far because of all the Black women who fought for us, like, and here only one name came to her mouth, Sojourner Truth, she explained. She explained, clearly relieved to think of it, but also embarrassed because she couldn't keep going. And she tried to continue. Nevertheless, the other Black women but here somebody in the audience spoke to her rescue by calling out the name of Harriet Tubman. At this point, I interrupted to observe that now we had 2 names for 482 years of our Afro-American history. What about Mary McLeod Bethune, someone else ventured at last. That's 3, I remarked, in the manner of a referee. Do we have a 4th? There was silence. Thoroughly embarrassed, the first woman looked at me and said, listen, I could come up with a whole list of Black women if my life depended on it. Well, I had to tell her, it does. So I love that excerpt because it speaks so clearly to the importance of legacy and memory and history and an acknowledgement of all that came before each of us. And I know that my fellow panelists tonight are steeped in the interest of history as a way to help us figure out where we are and to figure out questions that we need to ask in the current moment that will help us to build a future. So I'd love it if folks who wanted to would drop in the chat the name of a Black feminist ancestor, somebody who is a practitioner of Black feminism, who means something to you, who's informed part of who you are, who is part of the legacy that you bring forward with you tonight. So this is an invitation to drop your Black feminist ancestors in the chat. Thank you. I throw it back to you, Em. Please feel free to keep dropping those names.
Thank you so much, Mariame. Really appreciated hearing June Jordan's words, and it's beautiful to see everyone's names. So we're going to go ahead and begin. So I'll just go ahead and begin the first set of questions. And The questions are, what do you mean by abolition? How did you come into abolition as Black feminists? And why do you think abolition is important to Black feminism? So thinking about why is abolition important to Black feminism and why is Black feminism important to abolition? So I think we'll begin with Beth. Beth, do you want to begin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Just want to hold a little space for you and your leadership. So much appreciation and gratitude, Anne, for you. You're just one of these people who I hold close in my heart, and I think our movement holds you close as one of the most intentional allies that we could ever imagine. You're deeply precious to me, and I know to many other people. So thank you for this invitation, for this discussion. And Veronica, you weren't on when I came on, but I was not grounded. I was not breathing, I don't think, very deeply. My hands were all over the place. I think I did something like this. And so I so appreciate and honor what you did for us this evening, but also what you just seem to do wherever I go, where you are. Mariame, thank you for the chance to settle into the ancestors. I'm humbled, appreciate all the people who made this kind of evening happen. I see you on the screen too. I know many of you are part of this work. So I came to understand abolition through my work as an anti-violence Black feminist activist. And I appreciated, Anne, you talking about 20 years. It's been almost 40 for me. So I say that because in many ways it is the 40 years of standing in community with Black feminist activists that taught me to be an abolitionist. And for some people, when I say that anti-violence activism taught me to be a Black feminist abolitionist, it seems like a strange pathway, because for many people who have followed the more mainstream carceral logic, anti-violence activism would have us invested in what I have called the buildup of a prison nation. Anti-violence activism would have us, encouraging police to make more arrests when people are harmed, to reforming court systems so that they prosecute people. Punishment is the goal. Safety is measured by how long people are incarcerated. Laws are passed to ensure that people are incarcerated for long times, and funding follows those programs that are invested in the criminal legal system. But listening to women and others who are harmed through gender violence tell their story, and being surrounded by Black feminism, I learned 5 things instead. And I just want to name those 5 things. And Mariame, they are lessons that I really attribute very much to Black feminist ancestors. So Patricia Hill Collins taught me that we need to listen to those who are most harmed about what they need. The Combahee River Collective reminds me that our work for safety has to be based on support and freedom. Audre Lorde, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, right? Justice will not come from creating injustice. Bernice Johnson Reagan taught us that the violence that we're working against as anti-violence activists is intersectional. We have to join coalitions. And Ella Baker taught us that those of us who believe in freedom cannot rest. And so we have to be in the work for the long haul. And those are, for me, the 5 most important Black feminist principles, if you will, that are linked to abolition. So for me, abolition is a pathway to safety. It's a better route than carceral approaches. It means that in order to develop strategies that keep people safe, we have to also be invested in building a world that the threats to safety get disappeared. It means that we have to respond to the crisis at the same time that we're building broad change, and that our campaigns to support individual survivors have to recognize that there are communities and collectives that are also suffering and pain. Black feminism abolition is both and. It's centered on the needs of people who are most affected. It's aspirational, meaning we have to imagine what that world can be, but it also has to be concrete, and we have to figure out what our next steps are right now. So I offer that as my legacy into abolition, and it came directly through Black feminism, anti-violence activism. So for that, I think I'll pass it on to Mariame. We've shared some parts of the same path, and I'd be interested to hear how you would respond to the question.
Thank you, Beth. I'm not going to say all the things that you already said because they absolutely mirror my own path. And I also not going to say all the great things about Anne. Anne already knows how I feel about her. And just have had such an honor to be in partnership and collaboration over a long time. I think about the fact that I'm an abolitionist, I'm a PIC abolitionist, really because I worked in anti-violence work. I don't know if I would have come to abolition if I had been doing other kinds of organizing. Like, at least I wouldn't have come to it at the stage in my life that I did. And the reason that's the case is because I've always been interested in a politics that gets at the source of people's suffering and that identifies with people's grievances. And I've always been very much interested in uprooting violence. Like, that's what my kind of the through line of my work has been about, from the time I was a teenager into adulthood, whether those were the violences perpetuated by the state or interpersonal forms of violence. And I'm an abolitionist because carcerality is one of the most concentrated forms of violence that exists in the world. And how can I be somebody who purports to be anti-violence and then use violence to end violence? It never really made sense to me. So I always like to say that I'm on the side of an abolition that's rooted in transformative justice. There are other forms of abolition, and some of the PIC abolition that people subscribe to has a different political bent that would not be rooted in transformative justice. For me, transformative justice is deeply interwoven with Black feminism. And that's where I see my Black feminism rooted in abundance, rooted in a deep, deep desire to address root causes of violence, rooted in the fact that the reason for rejecting punishment, not only is it that it doesn't actually work, but it actually also doesn't create the new forms of governance and sociality that are based on the kinds of values that I have of the world in which I want to live. Like, I have a vision of a world I want to live in, and these forms of violent institutions actually are in the way of that. So I've had to find a politic, a framework, and a practice that would remove that. And PIC abolition was the closest thing married to transformative justice, which is grounded in Black feminism. So I would say that's where I see kind of my pathway and why it makes complete sense that I would find myself in this place, given what my really deep values are and my interest and my belief in the possibility of transformation for everybody. So I would love to throw over to my nemesis, arch rival, Rachel Caidor.
Of course, Rachel Caidor lost the mute button. Mariame. So you all, Mariame and I are arch nemesis, just so you know. And we're going to get in a bickering match at some point during this next 70 minutes, and it's going to be hilarious. And so thank you so much, Anne and Julie. and DePaul, like I live for these gatherings because it just helps me remember like not only where I came from, but who my people are and who I'm fighting for. And this sort of like leads me to not only how I came to Black feminism and abolition, but also sort of what drives it. And I kind of was gonna end up an abolitionist, right? Like I had two trajectories working against me for being like a normal person. Like I spent a lot of time doing anti-death penalty work as a, like, you know, teenager and in college. And like once you start peeling back the layers of the brutality of the system, like a lot of us, I went to Catholic school my whole life, and we start with this outer layer that's like like murdering people in prison is monstrous. And so like we peel back that layer and then we see that like keeping people in solitary confinement is monstrous. And then the more you peel back the layers, you realize that the entire system is about brutalizing and dehumanizing people, and there's no way to make it an okay place. And so like I was really like thinking through as a young person, what, like, what does it mean that we have so many people in these spaces that we've just sort of like resigned ourselves to being like the most inhumane spaces on the planet. At the same time, much like Beth and Mariame, I was working in anti-violence, and I, for a myriad of reasons, like for a myriad of really good reasons, like a majority of my clients, for example, were sex workers, and watching the way that the system that is ostensibly designed to support survivors of violence turned on these people because of their work, because of what they did to survive, just like really made it impossible for me to even look at that system as something that would be humane to anyone, right? And so I was really lucky to be able to come into this work like with this sort of like recognition of the brutality of the system. I also was really blessed to like learn a lot of early Black feminist work in college and in high school, because that's just what I did. I cut school a lot and read books that I wanted to, not the ones that were assigned. Don't be like me. But one of the things like that I really learned from Audre Lorde, like everyone wants to talk about the master's tools, and I think that that's really important. But Audre Lorde talks to us a lot about the power of anger and Black women's anger and in specific. And Black women's anger, I believe, comes from a deep place of love, not only of self, but of people. And that when you like that anger is actually a gift that Black women can manifest and harness to create life and to make the world a better place. And this is where I feel like Black feminism and abolition intersect for me the most, right? Like it's a rage at the system. It's a rage at this sort of dehumanization, and it's a rage at the lack of safety, right? And so like I really feel like abolition for me is very much about what Black feminism says, which is about sort of completely usurping all of the frameworks that we have been using till now, because they're not working for us, right? And so that abolition can't merely be about decarceration, right? To Ruthie's point, to so many other people's point, abolition is actually about creating the world we want to live in, per Mariame, creating safety, per Beth. And that safety has to look like, if tomorrow they shut down all the prisons and people are still abusing their partners, raping women, systematically killing trans women, then I would still say I am an abolitionist and I need things to be abolished, right? Abolition is a process, a project, a framework, and a lifestyle. It's not just a sort of like a tool for the moment, right? It's a commitment to an idea of freedom for everybody and freedom from harm. And that's sort of like, that's how I enter it. And hopefully I actually hope never to leave that space of seeking abolition, because that means that we will always be taking care of each other. And then I'm going to turn it over to the person who takes care of me so much, Deana Lewis.
Thanks. Thank you so much for everyone being here, for Anne organizing this. And it's amazing to be in this space with people who have and continue to teach me so much and have shepherded me along the way. And I'm so grateful to be here. I was thinking about this lineage that I'm a part of. Last week, I did a short lecture for a college class on the lineage of organizing and feminism, especially with Love and Protect, the collective I work with. Where Love and Protect fits in this lineage and where I fit in this lineage and emerge as a Black feminist. And so I thought about looking back and categorizing people, or actually without categorizing and labeling people as feminists before the term actually arises. The concepts, the ideology of Black feminism is there. It's in there with our ancestors, the ancestors that we put into the chat. And so I went back to Sojourner Truth, and in 1851, her famous speech, Ain't I a Woman, at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention, and how she pointed to white women, white men, and Black men at this time who are fighting for equality, supposedly, fighting for the ability for people to vote. And she's asking and saying, you're fighting for equality, but what is equality when you cannot recognize me for my humanity, for my own womanhood, for my own Black womanhood, someone who was bought out of slavery and is fighting to end slavery and give rights to, or have rights for other people. So in 1851 and earlier, I'm sure Sojourner Truth is addressing these intersections of race and gender and how these systems of oppression come together to hinder Black women's abilities to thrive. And so that, of course, launches me into the 1970s. And Beth already mentioned the Combahee River Collective. And let me also say there were other formations of Black women, gender nonconforming folks before this. But I really identify with what Combahee did and wrote. In the statement, I have a statement right next to me. In the statement, they articulated a Black feminism that is, quote, committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, end quote, among other oppressions. And they go on to, this is a really powerful statement to me, and I feel like it was to them, but here, quote, our politics initially sprang from the shared belief that Black women are inherently valuable, that our liberation is a necessity, not as an adjunct to somebody else's. This may seem so obvious as to sound simplistic, but it is apparent that no other ostensibly progressive movement has ever considered our specific oppression as a priority or worked seriously for the ending of that oppression, end quote. So I think about that because, of course, Black women are inherently valuable. However, it has to be stated because it sounds really simplistic as they say, but people don't recognize that. So that's my starting point. That's my center. That's where my feminist ideology, my Black feminist ideology grows and expands. And as I'm growing and expanding, I grew into abolition and understanding abolition. And I'll fully admit that when I started thinking deeply about abolition and getting involved in abolitionist projects, I was a little like, oh, I'm going to work at this. I'm going to work at this because people I know and love and care for and admire and mentors and contemporaries and people before me worked their butts off and they believed in this. But I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know. And then as I realized I wasn't paying attention to the many, 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 many people who wrote, who talked, who did this work and said, and that abolition is not only possible, it already exists. And that actually might be a direct quote from Mariame. I don't know. I'm not afraid to say that she influenced me greatly and influences me greatly in good ways, good ways. But that this abolition, it already exists, and that the abolition of the criminal legal system and its appendages is possible and achievable. And that the bolstering of communities and creating safer communities is happening. And I just want to take a quick detour about what I mean by safer communities to potentially disrupt the picture that's in your head. Because as a reminder, violence and harm happen in all communities, regardless of income levels, regardless of race, regardless of the state's investment or disinvestment of that neighborhood. And some of the harm is more public. Some of the people are more criminalized than others, and therefore made to seem more violent and harmful. So when I mean safer communities, I mean communities where a person can live and raise a child if they want to adulthood without fear of losing them to police violence, gun violence, inability to house themselves, inability to care due to inadequate wages, communities that have access to quality healthcare where they don't go into debt, communities where, of course, there will, or I shouldn't say of course, but there might be some harm, but communities that can address that harm without involving the state, right? And so often when people talk about abolition, they discuss, and others hear, that tearing down prisons and jails is the only thing. And tearing those down buildings are down and great. Freeing people is what we want. We want people that free. And that's what Rachel was also saying. And then as many other people take abolition as a step further to say that we need to dismantle the entire criminal legal system overall. That's true. And we also have to understand, pay attention, listen to the people who have been doing and saying that abolition is even more than that. And Rachel, Mariame, and Beth have said that, is we need to continue to build the world that we want to live in, build these safer communities, which involves more, like I said, than just getting rid of police and prisons. It also involves more, this might be a, I don't know. It also involves more than just dropping in healthcare systems, schools, and social workers, because those spaces and folks can also be places or perpetrators of violence. And I want to refer you to the Young Women's Empowerment Project, YWEP, their report on institutional violence, and also Liat Ben Moshe's work and book, Decarcerating Disability, for more information about the type of violence. And so the intersection for me between Black feminism and abolition happens when people talk about the criminal legal system as racist, capitalist, and classist. Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. And where Black feminists importantly bring to the abolitionist circle is an analysis of the legal system and carceral state that includes patriarchy, misogyny, misogynoir, a concept developed by Moya Bailey, homophobia, transphobia, and how we must dismantle all of these systems along with racism, capitalism, and classism to dismantle the PIC, the legal system, the carceral state. And I was listening to a conversation with Shira Hassan and Mimi Kim earlier today, and they were talking about getting at the root causes of issues. And I believe that is what Black feminists and Black feminist abolitionists are working to do. So I'm gonna kick it back to you, Anne.
Okay, wow, thank you so much, each of you, for what you brought. It really reminds me of the long history of abolitionism within Black feminism. So I really appreciated that. And also just thinking about it always brings me back to thinking about my own history and things that I was doing before I would have called myself an abolitionist, that were definitely abolitionist activities, right? In terms of the anti-violence movement. I think often people think the anti-violence movement would be opposed to abolitionism, right? The work around domestic and sexual violence. And yet I think each of you have shown how it grows from that. It really grows from that. And those commitments, that growth, I think is really powerful. And when I was thinking about the work that's happened in Chicago over the last 20 years, even though I recognize that it goes much further back, but thinking about, the last 20 years, thinking about the projects that you all have created and that you've been involved in. And I think it's so powerful because I think that many people will say abolition is it's something that would be way in the future rather than something people are building every day. And also, like we've all said, that it's about dismantling, not building. But I feel like what you all have done is really created spaces for building. You've helped build the kind of world that we want to live in, or helped to create containers for building the skills that we would need, or the kinds of relationships that we need to build together in order to live in a world without prisons and without incarceration and without police. So what I'd like us to do now is to kind of think about some of those, if you want to share some of that work over the last, say, 20 years, some of the projects that you helped to create and that you feel have really contributed to the building of abolition in Chicago and beyond. I'm also, we are kind of centering it in Chicago because I think there's been amazing things that have happened in Chicago, the kinds of organizations, the projects, the gatherings, all of it, the protests, I think Chicago's been a real center. And you all have been part of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Mariame if you want to start us off, because I think you've been at the center of creation of many, many different projects and initiatives. So I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm in kind of thinking through like an arc that is nonlinear, but is chronological to some degree. I'm thinking about Chicago as the place where 2 of the 4 Insight Women and Trans People of Color Against Violence national convenings occurred. The second one that happened in 2002, and the final one so far, the last one that happened in 2015, sorry. There've been 4 of the gatherings, one in California, one in New Orleans, and 2 in Chicago. And I don't think it's a coincidence that was the case. Not only because of Beth's co-founding of Insight, Beth also being one of the people at the table for the Critical Resistance Conference that happened in '98. I don't think there's a way to minimize kind of her presence in Chicago, attracting other people into the city, but also kind of being a magnet for the thinking and work that helps to shape those projects that I helped build. I said this years ago, a couple of years back, when I was doing some remarks at a gathering where Beth was being honored for her scholarship and achievement in kind of intellectual thinking and thought, that, I've kind of, I met Beth before she met me, and I met her through reading an important piece that she wrote in the 1980s that was published in the Black Scholar that was about Black battered women. I read it in college. It was a thing that really spoke to me. I hadn't read anything else like it. And I didn't even have language at the time for how she was talking about Black women and the forms of violences that we were subjected to interpersonally, and the way that the state also was a violator of us. And I took the things that I was reading and trying to understand. And for me, it's always been one of the most important parts of what I think is important in the world is to think about the how of things. There's a lot of people who focus on the what of things, and a lot of people who focus on the why of things. And I think those are important. But my personal kind of like what I feel most driven to contribute is the how. The how are we going to take the ideas that we have and create the containers for those ideas to become collective projects where we can collaborate on the solutions that we want to see in the world. How do we do that? And so it's been for my adult life, and frankly, since I was a teenager, that I've been trying to build those containers in various kinds of ways through conferences, through convenings, through organization, through, you know, exhibitions, which are also a similar process of taking a whole bunch of information, distilling it to its core ideas, telling a story, inviting people into the story, and then asking people to do something now that they know, now that they have this information. What are you going to do with it? What are the actions that you're going to take? So I feel like all the things that I do, the making that I do, you know, Ruthie Gilmore always says that, you know, abolition is a huge part of abolition is about making things. And I really believe that it's a goal of ours is to make as many things as possible, a million different experiments to figure out ways that we're going to keep making, because we're going to keep failing. And failure, right? Like a lot of the people who write about failure as being a queer thing, that is a thing that we ought to embrace, actually, because it means you're trying a lot of different kinds of things and you're going to fall on something that is actually going to be the thing that is going to help to get us to the next place, so that we can make more mistakes, so that we find the thing that'll get us to the next place after that. And in this culture, a deeply capitalist, scarcity, shrunken, fear-based culture that we have in the US, that is very tied to whiteness, that particular type of being is antithetical to Black feminist theory, Black feminist praxis and thought, because Black feminism is about love, it's about abundance, it's about non-scarcity, it's about prefiguration, it's about collectivity, right? It's about, you know, a Black feminism is not an exclusive province of Blackness. It's actually very focused on multiracialism in the best sense, multi-classism in the best sense, multi-genderism in the best sense, because what we understand is that we ourselves aren't going to be able to free ourselves by ourselves. That's just not going to fucking happen. And I want to be free. So I want to figure out who else is going to be in the mix with us while we're doing that. I think there's a lot of confusion in the land, frankly, and I'm not going to go into it tonight, but there's a lot of confusion in the land about centering, like what that actually means, you know? And our best thinkers told us a long time ago that hierarchies of oppression are deadly for all of us, not just for some of us, but they're most deadly for the most marginalized, because you're never going to be on fucking top, right? If we're going to keep going with that hierarchical model of pain and struggle. So Black feminists, I think, have figured something out about the need to work with lots of different people to build our projects. And so that's what I've been trying to do in multiple kinds of ways for the years I've been trying to do this work. So maybe I'll throw over to Deana, if Deana wants to add to that.
Sure, thanks, Mariame.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna hype up Love and Protect, and know that I'm biased, and I'm sure other folks here are biased too. So Love and Protect is a volunteer collective. We're grassroots. We're in Chicago. We provide direct support to BIPOC women and gender nonconforming folks, and trans men who have been criminalized for self-defense. And we also kind of work to raise awareness about this issue. So I want to again go back and do a little bit of history so people know where Love and Protect came from. And so in 2013, it began as CAFMA, Chicago Alliance to Free Marissa Alexander. Miriam, Ayanna Banks Harris, Tasasha Henderson, Maya Shenwar, among other people, co-founded this collective as a support/defense committee for Marissa Alexander. And if you don't know Marissa Alexander, I'm going to drop the drop a link in the chat, but Marissa's from Florida and was criminalized and imprisoned for defending herself against her abusive partner. In 2015, she accepted a plea deal, and CAFMA, wanting to continue the work, transitioned into Love and Protect. And so what does it mean to support people on the inside? Or support criminalized folks. So what we're doing is we are providing different types of material support and emotional support to people who have defended themselves against interpersonal violence, and then have experienced state violence by being locked up. And we understand and know that the state in its many forms, including policing, courts, prisons, child protective services, ICE, etc., is actually the main perpetrator of violence in marginalized people's lives, and particularly Black women living in disadvantaged communities. So what we are interested in doing is developing relationships with these folks who are on the inside, and not only saying, hey, we see you, right? Like Veronica reminded us at the beginning of this session. We see you, we care about you, we know you're in there, and we want to build with you. We want to do that, and we want to let the state know, hey, we know someone we love is there. We know that they're there, and you're not going to disappear them, and we're going to keep fighting until they are also free. And I actually have a quote, can't see it right behind me, about that really helps to frame how we actually do the work. We're interested in solidarity, and like many Black feminist groups, not only in Chicago, but all around, we're interested in solidarity and not charity work, because, and as Mariame was saying, if those folks aren't free, we're not free. And I want to be free. I want to be liberated, right? I want liberation. And so I'm going to need to fight for my own liberation, and I'm going to need to fight for other folks' liberation. And also, so that's thinking about the state, but also on the other side, we also want to end interpersonal violence. We want to end interpersonal gender-based violence. Like Rachel was saying, if prisons are abolished tomorrow, and we still have violence rooted in patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, in these other structural issues, then we still need abolition. We still have a lot of work to do. And we don't want to rely on violent institutions that are not safe for women, for GNC folks, for trans men of color, which is what the state and the state fosters that type of violence. So that's one example that I wanted to share before we moved on about Black feminist abolitionist work. So I'm gonna kick it over to Rachel, my organizing homie.
Thank you, organizing homie. I gotta warn you all that Deana and I, when we were prepping for this event, spent, I think 45 minutes of the hour we were prepping trying to figure out which one of us is which member of the Wu-Tang Clan. I'm Oh Dirty Bastard.
And drop in the chat who you think each one of us is.
Please don't.
Just
I am the ODB. And so I think Chicago is, I wasn't born and raised in Chicago, but Chicago is, I think, the most amazing place to organize. And Chicago does shit in a way that that no one else in the country does. And I'm not gonna, other places organize in really beautiful ways as well. But Chicago does amazing, amazing work. And I feel really, really lucky that I've gotten to be a part of so many amazing movements. There's no other city in this country that is like admitted that it tortures people in prisons and jails, and then offered them reparations. Like, go ahead and tell me where else people are doing that, and I will be sitting here waiting with my tea. Anyway, but so I feel like one of the most formative, I'm going to talk about two really formative things that happened, that I was a part of in Chicago, that actually led to so many other things. The first was helping organize Color Violence 2 with Beth. And I'm going to tell you, I remember distinctly like reading Compelled to Crime, and it broke my brain in college. I was like that gif of the guy that's like, that was me in college, pre-gifts and pre-cell phone. And then I remember getting on the Damon Avenue bus and seeing Beth Ritchie on the bus. And I was like, I think that's the person who wrote that awesome book. But more importantly, she had an amazing manicure. And she was like, I was like, you have a really great manicure. And she was like, well, you can't do good if you don't look good. And I was like, we're going to be friends forever. And I was right. But organizing COV2 was such an eye-opening event for me, because we just don't get to be in spaces that center the knowledge created by radical women of color, and center that knowledge as knowledge that wasn't only gained because someone went to a school or wrote a book or read a book, right? And so it was, for me, you know, and I'm also like an aging punk rocker, right? So for me, this was, you know, Color Violence and sort of this face-to-face interaction with Insight, which I think is one of the most important organizing bodies that ever was birthed ever, really helped me recognize that there was a space for radical, like, women and femmes and trans people of color to have our work seen and moved forward and lifted up, and to give us venues to talk about not only the mistakes that we've made and not only critique the worlds that we live in now, but to start building a world that we want to live in, and sort of like recognizing the different sort of configurations of people that you could bring together like a Voltron to make the most, make wonderful things happen, right? And so like I think about Color Violence and I think about Insight very much like, and I went to the first Insight in California too, and I talk about it in that, like, that moment where like 5 people went to the show, but then all those 5 people started bands that are all your favorite bands, right? And I think that is one of the, that's like one of the key things that like really activated me to do broader work in Chicago. I also have to say that I was blessed/cursed with collaborating with Mariame on like several several exhibits. And those exhibits were life-changing, in part because I got to argue with Mariame like every day for like 6 years of my life. And it was fulfilling. I got really good at bickering with Mariame. And I'm putting the 3 exhibits that we collaborated on in the chat, because what those exhibits really helped me understand was like the different ways that people can enter into the work. And for as crabby as Mariame pretends to be, and as crabby as I actually am, hello, anger, like there is, like, one of the most important parts of organizing is relationship building and relating to each other. And all of these exhibits were such a useful way for people to come into a topic that they didn't know about and that were scared about, and like find a space to talk about them. So we got together, Mariame, as a benefit for the Chicago Alliance to Free Marissa Alexander, helped put together No Selves to Defend. And I think No Selves to Defend really encapsulated the issue of criminalized survivors for a lot of people. really helped illustrate, literally, because there were beautiful paintings and illustrations about this like mythology around sort of like who protects survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence. And this may sort of go to one of the questions in the chat, but you know, like one of the things that we learned from Marissa Alexander, and one of the things that we learned from the organizing that has happened over hundreds of years in defense of Black and brown women who are survivors of violence, is that like actually the last people who are going to defend us are the cops, right? And that we actually have more examples of like situations where those systems have harmed us, have incarcerated us for self-defense, who perpetuate the self-defense, who perpetuate the harm, right? Like what we know, for example, is that police, like the largest number of complaints of police violence actually come at the hands of their partners, because they go home and beat the shit out of their partners, right? These are not the people I want to call when I'm raped, right? But so like one of the things that No Selves to Defend did really beautifully, and I hate to have to give Mariame credit for it because now I'm never going to hear the end of it, is that like really like distilled that in a way that people could understand, and then ask them to do something about it. And I think that like that sort of like gave rise to so many different ways that people engaged activism in Chicago, right? Like that introduced a different relationship to the way people did art in Chicago, which I think greatly influenced like the continuing art practice of, say, the Chicago torture justice memorials, right? I think that like the way that the time that we spent honoring the stories of those survivors and like pointing out the ways that community came through for those survivors helped people who thought like, oh, no one else can confront the criminal legal system except for lawyers, like help them see that like actually those are not the people who like drive the change and drive freedom. So I think that those exhibits and that work, and also getting the Color of Violence to come here, both Color of Violence 2 and Color of Violence 4, really helped people put roots in Chicago. And people don't need to physically be here, but put a root down in the way Chicago organizes, which is about building relationships, which is about telling stories and honoring stories. And it's about making visible sort of not only our mistakes, but our solidarity. And so I dropped some of those things in the chat that Mariame and I did. And of course, like in trying to figure out who's who in the Wu-Tang, I'm gonna kick it over to Beth, who's the RZA, because she is like the G who brought us all together. And so, so please drop some bars on the people, Beth.
Wow, well, this has been amazing to hear the perspectives of the legacy. I'm appreciative and honored for the specific recognition, and all of it is just to be spread widely. There are many names of people that could be invoked in this discussion about Chicago abolition organizing. I want to take the risk of naming organizations just sort of randomly. These are about the roots, Rachel. So We Charge Genocide, Project NIA, Asada's Daughters, Love and Protect, Prison Neighborhood Arts Project, Let Us Breathe Collective, BYP 100, Chicago Legal Aid to Incarcerated Mothers, YWEP, Young Women's Empowerment Project, did I say Brave Space Alliance already? The Black Abolition Network, on and on. It's clear that there is abolition movement happening in Chicago. And I think that's true for a couple of reasons. And then there's all the organizations I didn't name. So I want to talk, it's interesting. I also was going to talk about Color of Violence 2 and 4. And I was going to talk about the Color of Violence Conference as the kind of convenings that create joyful space where people work together, sleep together, organize together, eat together, raise children together. It becomes, in a conference, a movement. Not all conferences become movements, but the Insight conferences did. It's also important in the genealogy to know that the first conference, which was on UIC's campus, we were almost thrown off the campus at the last minute. Why? Because the women's studies program on our campus took exception to some of the work that Insight was doing around the rights of Palestinian women. We just need to say that. Now, it's a very, I think I saw Jenny Breyer here, and there's a lot, and Rachel's with Gender and Women's Studies now. It's a whole different place now, a whole different scene, but that could have happened on any campus at that time when radical people interested in ending state and intimate violence in the lives of marginalized groups includes in the analysis things like war and occupation and colonialism. We still gathered joyfully, 2,000 of us, right, took over the space and claimed it as our own. Right after we almost got pushed off the campus, we lost our major funder, the Ford Foundation. Why? Because we had a critique of the carceral state, which, even though that and many other foundations were beginning to think about reform work in, were still in many ways supported by, in terms of where their funding came from. So this isn't to indict Ford specifically or UIC specifically, but more to say that we came ready to create. We came ready to network, interact, to dance and party. It was a fabulous women's dance we had at COV2. But we also came in really serious struggle because we identified our work not as only anti-violence work as it was defined by the academy and foundations, but because we defined it as radical work that had to include things that major foundations and major academic institutions would not co-sign. The other thing I want to lift up, and part of why I started by naming names, is in 2017, I think it was, we had a weekend series of events called Chicago for Abolition. I know some of you were there. I see some of the names of people who participate in that. That was motivated by Critical Resistance, an organization that Miriam already talked about. Critical Resistance, one of the first national organizations that stepped out in opposition to the prison industrial complex. And I think in many ways was the first group that popularized the notion of abolition. A group that was deeply influenced by Black feminists. Most of the leadership of the origin of Critical Resistance were Black feminists. And so clearly they have been able to do work that's lasted over time because they've embraced Black feminist ideology. In 2017, Critical Resistance came to Chicago as a invitation with some support for us to gather, all of us, and talk about what part of our work in the organizations that I just named and many others, what part of our work is abolition? Abolition wasn't in the title of the organizations. It wasn't even at that time, 2017 wasn't that long ago, but it wasn't even in a major demand of many of the organizations. Black feminists were in leadership in many of them, but they weren't identified as Black feminist organizations at that time. I think what Critical Resistance did in the weekend-long Chicago for Abolition event was create an opportunity for us to name our relationship to each other as abolitionist groups, and to name our orientation to our work as abolitionist work, and indeed Black feminist work. And I name that because Color of Violence was the joyous space to convene with each other against very strong opposition. The Chicago for Abolition event was a chance to sort of link our arms together and say, we are an abolitionist space, meaning geographic space. And there's long-term work that's going to happen in this city that will be informed by the politics of abolition and Black feminism. And we were going to talk, I don't think we have time to talk about kind of what we hope for the future, but if I can just say, I think one of my hopes is that those of us, whether we're in Chicago or not, who are doing abolition work, will name that work as abolition work now that has deep roots, years and years of organizing, laid the ground for abolition to become a term that so many identify with now. And many people who are in leadership now are Black feminists who are claiming a contemporary kind of abolition work that is critically important at this moment and could not have happened had there not been the historical groundbreaking that so many organizations, including the ones represented by the other panelists and many of you who are here with us tonight, you set the groundwork for what I think is the groundswell of Black feminist abolition now.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, wow. I think that this history is so valuable and important, and I hope we continue to find ways to document and to spread it, because I think exactly what you said at the end, Beth, that it's really laid an amazing foundation, you know, and understanding its legacy and the legacy of Black feminist abolitionism is just so, I think it's so important, especially as we think about, as we move into the future. Like, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is that the way that the term itself, abolition, has come to be used in all these different ways, that is often, you know, not as recognizable, right, of what the kind of abolitionism that you all are talking about. And so we're running out of time, but I wondered if this last question, you could just spend a couple minutes on each of you to think about sort of some of the current campaigns around justice for, like, Breonna Taylor, right? Or in response to other sort of what people are calling for, and what Black feminism would bring to such campaigns, or what would a Black feminist campaign look like for Breonna Taylor? I'm sure there are already those, but what's distinctive about what Black feminism brings to those campaigns? So maybe Rachel, would you mind beginning that?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. And thanks for everyone being here. Some things immediately off the top of my head. First of all, people wouldn't be calling for the arrest of these people because master's tools, master's house, like the rest are, you know, only actually reify this problematic system that they're in, and also isolates these that behavior as if that's not a systemic problem. So people wouldn't be campaigning for an arrest. And I think that there would be a lot more healing justice weaved in through a lot of these asks, not only healing justice and restorative, transformative, and accountability justice. And so there would be attention paid to the impact that this is having on the community, attention paid to the generational impacts that this is a result of, and also that are going to cause, right? Sort of, it would require accessing ancestors and ancestral knowledge about how to heal around this kind of unspeakable violence. And then finally, it would involve completely dismantling this system that is clearly beyond fixing, because it was never working for us in the first place. I'm going to send it to Beth to follow up.
Well, am I muted? Let me see. Oh, no, good. Rachel, I was going to say the exact same thing. Thank you. The only thing I would add, you said it beautifully. I think that transformative, the healing part is so important and so often lost. I think that an abolitionist, a Black feminist abolitionist response would name itself as such. And I say that because I think the youth-led intergenerational leadership by people most affected, support for her family, the recognition of what's lost in the world because she's gone, the world that we could create instead, what would have been a better world that Breonna wouldn't have been murdered. I think people are talking about that. And people say, as a Black feminist abolitionist, this is the campaign that we're running. And I don't mean to say that as a way to shortcut the hard description of what abolition is, but more to make sure that when the story's written, because freedom has come, that Black feminist abolition is part of that story. And the risk of the Black women's labor, the abolitionists' contribution to liberation being erased, I think is against, counter to the purpose of what we're trying to do. So for me, I want a public declaration of our work as Black abolition feminism. And there's lots of room for everybody in that struggle for justice. Oh, and I will pass it to Deana.
Thanks, Beth. I mean, I think the two of you said everything so beautifully. I want to, of course, I'm going to add something because that's what you do after you've said everything I've said. But I want to say and underscore that this work is really, really, really hard. And if I were in Massachusetts, I would say it's wicked ad. It's a lifelong and daily work, in my opinion. And because we're fighting against years and years and many types of media and an indoctrination and socialization into what justice looks like, we're fighting against that when we're talking about abolition. We're fighting against that when we're engaging in Black feminism. And Andrea Ritchie just dropped a link in the chat to an article that she and Mariame wrote about what justice could look like for Breonna Taylor and her family. And they make, of course, great points. Some of the great points that we need to think about that are actually like, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. A system that kills Black people is not going to then find justice for the Black person they just killed. That just makes no sense. It will never do that. And so we have to change the way we're demanding justice when these things happen. And Rachel and Beth, set that out clearly. It's set out clearly in the this article too. Think about also material support, right? And other things that can happen for the family. And I'm going to say this might not be popular. Just going to throw it out there, see what people think. And it's not, I'm not saying it's the only thing that these folks should do, but the police officers need to acknowledge that what they did was wrong, extremely harmful, and traumatizing. And that acknowledgement can set forth a path towards healing, in my opinion. Mariame, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Deana. All amazing thoughts from everybody. I so appreciate all of you. I would just say that we're actually living through a really incredible moment right now on multiple fronts. But one of the fronts that gives me a lot of hope for what is to come is the way that mutual aid has proliferated across the country and the world in this pandemic moment. Because at bottom, for me, mutual aid is really collectivity towards survival. And a huge, huge part of Black feminist praxis is collectivity towards survival. Like there's overlap there. Black feminists are very much attuned to everyday practices that people employ to live. We are about life affirming, life giving, life celebrating. That is a core tenet for me of Black feminist praxis. And mutual aid is deeply, deeply steeped within that. Saidiya Hartman, years ago, I heard her say at an event where she was celebrating a book by Black feminist Christina Sharp called In the Wake. And Saidiya Hartman said at this gathering that care was the antidote to violence. And I think about that all the time, that care is the antidote to violence. For me, Black feminism is so steeped in care at its core. And that gives me a sense that we figured out some part of the magic that it's going to take for us to get free. If we stay rooted in that and grounded in that and really understand that. So I think our movements, especially in the abolitionist sphere, have always been deeply, deeply steeped within mutual aid as key, because we're working with people who are the margins of the margins. And we've had to find fugitive ways of providing care across deeply repressive regimes, that the whole purpose of which is to break relationship along with breaking people. And against all that, rooted by Black feminist theory and praxis and guided by it, by so many Black feminists who've done this work for ages and ages and ages, we've found a way to still make those folks part of our communities despite everything against it. That feels to me like such a wonderful way to keep building for the world that we want to live in, that the world in which we want to kind of be able to get free. So I think those are the things I'm looking towards for the future, is an expansion of that mutual aid, more rooted, more deeply focused on care, new ways of governance for each other, new ways of being social with each other, new ways of transforming our relationships to each other in those containers. I'll pass it back to you, Anne.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I mean, I think that we're going to end here. I think this ending was absolutely beautiful. Like, I think that, you know, lifting up love and care. I mean, I feel like that's what I've learned so much from Black feminist work and all of you and others. And I feel like that's also often what's a missing link for organizing work, the organizing work I've been involved in over the last, 40 or 50 years. And so I really hope that we can all, hold that and carry that forward, because I think that is what can lead us into a different future, not the same future that we're living in now. So thank you. I want to thank each one of you, Deana, Rachel, Mariame, Beth, if everyone could lift their hands, or I just appreciate each of you. Thank you so much for all that you've given. There's so much more to talk about and to lean into. And I'll turn it over now to Julie Moody Freeman, who's gonna close us up. Julie?
I just want to say thanks. This was wonderful. Thanks to all of our speakers and to everybody for attending. And thanks so much to Veronica for centering us and honoring ancestors at the beginning. And the music was beautiful. I just wanted to end by talking very quickly about an event that Anne and I are collaborating on again. Anya Davis will be coming on November 9th, and she will be talking about race, restorative justice, and healing. So I welcome you to that event. We will send out links for everybody. And also we will gather the chat together and we will share it with everyone because there are some really wonderful resources. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks again.